That's grit. Okay. So just to finish, basically copying all the styles that were in that section of the CSS. So the idea here was, if you look at the CSS file from the static version, there's a whole section in here that starts with dot sidebar. So we're basically trying to recreate all of those styles and apply them to the correct elements. So just to do that real quick, I'm just going to kind of copy in the finished product here. So I've got these rules that apply to the sidebar itself, the entire div, or nav element if you use a nav element like we did in the original HTML wasn't a nav. Logo, apply these to the div containing the logo. Here's the style that actually gets applied to the image in there, the SVG. Then we have two images for new note, right? The two plus icons that were appearing side by side, or one on top of the other, depending on how far you'd gotten. The idea is they should be one on top of the other, and the top one should become opaque when you hover. So to make them on top of one another, we make their container, new note, have a position of relative, and we make the images themselves have a position of absolute. That's a topic that's not worth getting into in great detail, but absolute positioning takes something out of the flow of the document, which means other elements no longer take pains to avoid covering them and so on. And it also doesn't give a crap if it's covering something else. So if we give both images a position of absolute, they'll be just one right on top of each other. And absolute positioning is not relative to the page necessarily. It is relative to its closest ancestor that is also positioned. So that's why we make new note position relative, which leaves it in the flow of the document exactly where it would be without positioning. But it means that then when we absolutely position the image inside that, it'll be relative to that container. It's a very Googleable topic if you want to learn more about it. So just carry on and do all the rest of them. And then we just have style tags for all of these. So the whole CSS in JavaScript topic is quite a thing. There are a lot of ways of doing it and a lot of strong opinions on it. Some people think it's just gross to do altogether. I don't necessarily feel that way. One nice thing about it, besides what we already talked about, where we're actually scoping these styles to these elements now, and there's no risk that a style that we write for the sidebar is going to mess up the way something appears somewhere else on the page. Can't happen, because we're totally attaching these things to this component. Aside from that, you kind of have to do it this way in React Native. And so if you do it this way in React, you might be able to actually share some of your style code between the two if you're making both a native and a web version of the same thing, which is something that I just got finished doing right before class. So that's another advantage there. So the way we're doing it here, what you end up with, let me go ahead and save the changes. Now the hover thing isn't there yet. What you end up with if you inspect is inline styles. So you have style equals inside the actual HTML tags. So you're not using an actual style sheet. You're actually using the style property on the element, the style attribute in the HTML. That's where they end up when we do it this way, which is fine. If you read some of the blog posts about CSS and JavaScript, I found one that's saying this is not CSS and JavaScript. Well, it is. And like the first time I ever saw that phrase used was a Facebook presentation years ago when they were talking about exactly this. So it is, but there are other ways of doing it too that get around the problem we have with hover. So let's look at that hover problem. But I'll start a new video.